Hello and welcome to World Panorama, Rajya Sabha TV's one-stop show to keep you updated on all the big international news stories that unfolded this week. I am Aishwarya with you. First, a look at the week's top stories in the headlines. Middle East continues to remain tense as Saudi Arabia, US blame Iran for attacks on two oil facilities. Trump announces highest-level sanctions against Tehran to also send troops to Saudi Arabia. Oil prices jumped to their biggest weekly rise since January. Benjamin Netanyahu's rival Benny Gantz declares victory for his party in Israeli election, but with neither close to winning the parliamentary majority, weeks of negotiations to form coalition expected to start. Violence in Afghanistan escalates as country prepares for presidential elections on 28th of September. Dozens killed in bombings this week claimed by Taliban, including at an election rally. And a report on tigers that were rescued from a Thailand temple. More than half of the 147 rescued big cats have died because of disease. Government blames inbreeding and living conditions at the temple for their lowered immunity and subsequent deaths. Top story this week, Saudi Arabia's defense ministry has shown off what it says is the wreckage of the drones and the cruise missiles that proves Iranian involvement in the weekend attacks on its two oil facilities. This despite Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthi rebels claiming responsibility. Iran has denied any involvement, but US also has stood by its accusation that Iran was behind the attacks. US would now be sending forces to Saudi Arabia that it says are defensive in nature. US President Donald Trump also announced the highest-level sanctions against Iran. Meanwhile, oil prices jumped more than 7% this week, their biggest in months.
Tensions in the Middle East have escalated, this after drone attacks on two major oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. The drone attacks hit the world's biggest petroleum processing facility as well as a nearby oil field, both of which are operated by energy giant Aramco. The pre-dawn attacks on Saturday knocked out more than half of crude output from the world's top exporter, 5% of the global oil supply, and cut output by 5.7 million barrels per day. Yemen's Houthi rebels, who have been locked in a war with the Saudi-UAE-led coalition since 2015, claimed responsibility for the attacks.
The king has re-emphasized the kingdom's ability to deal with the consequences of the cowardly attacks that did not target the vital installations in the kingdom, but targeted global oil supplies and threatened the stability of the international economy.
But the US accused Iran of being behind the assault. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo got en route for the Middle East on Tuesday night as President Donald Trump mulls response to the oil attacks. However, Tehran has rejected the allegations, saying the United States was ignoring that Yemenis were fighting back after years of war against their kingdom.
In the wake of this weekend's unprovoked attack on several oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, I promise you, we're ready. As the President said, we don't want war with anybody, but the United States is prepared. We're locked and loaded.
After the attacks, oil prices ended nearly 15% higher on Monday, with the Brent benchmark seeing its biggest jump in about 30 years. Prices fell back after President Donald Trump vowed to release US reserves. The two oil plants hit by the strikes together account for about 50% of Saudi Arabia's oil output. The kingdom says it will restore lost oil production by the end of the month. This is an indication that its supply to top consumers in Asia, who consume more than 70% of total Saudi crude oil, will remain stable.
The company will withdraw from its reserves of crude oil and making some changes to some oils so that complete production capabilities are restored to 11 million barrels per day by the end of September and to 12 million barrels per day by the end of November.
Saudi Arabia is continuing its investigation into the attacks and has invited global experts for the probe. The attacks have led to the formation of a US-led coalition to secure the Middle East's waterways, a mission already joined by Australia, Bahrain and the United Kingdom. Needless to say that Middle East remains on the edge after the attacks, and the repercussions on world politics and the global market are going to continue in the days and months to come. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
News from Israel now, where the recently held election has thrown up almost a tie result. Both Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party and his rivals Benny Gantz's Blue and White party failed to get majority to form a government of their own. Benny Gantz's party won 33 seats in parliament and Netanyahu's Likud party won 31 seats in the 120-member parliament. Netanyahu urged Benny Gantz to form a unity government, but the ex-military leader refused. Now that leaves the country's politics and Netanyahu's future also uncertain. Netanyahu, Israel's longest-serving leader, faces possible indictment in 3 corruption cases in which he denies any wrongdoing.
It was Israel's second election in a year, and yet it ended in a deadlock. Both Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's and his rival Benny Gantz parties failed to win enough votes on Tuesday to build a coalition with a majority. Official results have been slow to be released by the Central Election Committee, with 97% of the votes counted. Benny Gantz's centrist Blue and White party is on track to win 33 seats, 2 more than Netanyahu's Likud party in the 120-seat parliament.
One can say that according to the results as they appear to be, Netanyahu did not succeed in his mission.
As a result, now both men are jostling over leadership. On Thursday, Netanyahu urged Gantz to start negotiation on a joint or a unity administration. However, Gantz rebuffed the idea. He said he wanted a unity government, but only one led by him. Further, his party has ruled out joining a coalition led by Netanyahu.
We will not enter a coalition led by Netanyahu. We came to fix things, to heal rifts, to get the country back on track. Because with Netanyahu, it will not work.
This sets the stage for several long weeks of political bartering. Netanyahu leads a cluster of right-wing and ultra-orthodox parties, which currently stands at 55 seats. A Gantz-led central-left bloc would potentially have 57 seats. One wild card is Avigdor Lieberman. It was Lieberman who had refused to join Netanyahu's coalition after April's election, forcing a second election. He may end up as a kingmaker this time. After the final vote count is in, the president will hold consultations with party representatives and then nominate a candidate whom he believes has the best chance of forming the government. The nominee will have 42 days to form the government.
I believe this time they will have to find a solution and not to have another election. It is too costly and too difficult to be a whole year without any government that can really do what a government has to do.
The next few weeks will decide not only on the future of Israel, but personally for Netanyahu as well. After a long-running police investigation, Israel's Attorney General has announced his intention to indict Netanyahu in 3 corruption cases. If Netanyahu does remain as Prime Minister or a rotating one, the law says he does not have to step down even if he is formally charged. But Netanyahu could face political and public pressure to leave office. The final leadership will also affect Israel-Palestine peace plan. Netanyahu has announced his intention to annex much of the West Bank, where the Palestinians seek statehood. However, a cabinet with Gantz in it would likely be more open to negotiations with the Palestinians. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Violence by Taliban in Afghanistan has escalated as the country prepares for presidential elections on 28th of September. 20 people were killed on Thursday in a bombing outside a hospital in southern Afghanistan, and earlier on Tuesday, at least 50 people were killed in two separate bomb attacks. Now, hopes had risen that the 18-year-old conflict could be coming to an end after it was revealed that the Taliban and the US had almost reached a peace deal in early September. But US President Donald Trump then pulled out of the agreement after a Taliban attack in Kabul that killed a US soldier and 11 others on 6th of September.
Marked increase in violence in Afghanistan this week saw more bombings by the Taliban. On Thursday morning, 20 people died after a truck packed with explosives was detonated by Taliban militants outside a hospital in southern Afghanistan. Many of the victims in the attack in Kalat city were doctors and patients. Earlier, at least 50 people were killed in two separate bomb attacks on Tuesday. The first attack took place in Parwan province, north of the capital Kabul. An election rally where President Ashraf Ghani was due to speak was attacked. A suicide bomber blew himself up at a checkpoint near the rally venue.
When the people were entering the police camp, an old man riding a motorcycle arrived on the highway and detonated his explosives, causing casualties. His dead body remains on the ground.
Then another blast took place near the US Embassy in central Kabul. A suicide bomber detonated himself with explosive at Masood Square.
Suddenly a blast occurred at the entrance of the Army Recruitment Center near the US Embassy. I saw people and human flesh in the air.
The Taliban claimed responsibility for both the bombings, making good on a threat leveled right after US President Donald Trump called off the peace talks. Earlier this month, the US and the Taliban that are holding talks since late last year appeared close to a deal to end the 18-year conflict. According to the in-principle deal that was reached in exchange for the troop withdrawal, the Taliban were willing to pledge that Afghanistan would never again be used as a base for foreign terrorism. But then a Taliban attack in Kabul on 6th September killed a US soldier and 11 others, prompting Trump to pull out. Yet the Taliban say their doors are open should the US president want to resume peace talks in the future.
And international community, every time they says they have complained against Taliban, but never said anything about the killing of civilians and all over Afghanistan.
Meanwhile, Taliban attacks are intensifying as the country prepares for its presidential election on September 28th. President Ashraf Ghani, who is looking for another 5-year term, is the favorite to win, leaving him well placed to claim a popular mandate to set the terms of any new agreement with the Taliban. So far, the Taliban have refused to recognize the legitimacy of President Ghani's administration. They have refused to hold direct talks with the Afghan government until a US deal is agreed to. But now, with the deal with the US off the table, at least for now, it is an opportunity for the Afghan government to get back in the game and shape the future direction of the peace process. Taliban are now in control of more territory than at any point before the 2001 US-led invasion, and ahead of presidential elections are making their presence felt even more acutely and violently through the attacks. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
In World Panorama, we'll take a very short break, and after the break, we take a look at what happened to Thailand's tigers that were removed during a 2016 crackdown on the country's controversial tiger temple. Reports say that more than half of them have died. So what happened? All the details coming up ahead. Stay tuned. News from Thailand now. More than half of the 147 tigers that were rescued from a controversial Thai Buddhist temple just 3 years ago have died. A total of 86 tigers have died since they were removed from a tourist attraction known as the Tiger Temple in 2016. Thailand's Park Service said that many of them have died because of a virus having been weakened by the stress of relocations. And officials also blame genetic problems linked to their inbreeding among their group for their death. Remember the Tiger Temple in Thailand? Yes, the same temple which was seen in social media accounts where people were seen petting, feeding and taking pictures with the tigers. The attraction, run by Buddhist monks located in Thailand's Kanchanaburi province west of Bangkok, was closed for public in 2016 after a raid on the temple over accusations of wildlife trafficking and animal abuse. At the time of the raid, 40 tiger cubs were found dead in a freezer at the temple. Police also found tiger skins and teeth and at least 1,500 amulets made from tiger bones. Police and wildlife officials then started an operation to remove and rehabilitate all the living tigers at the temple. But in a tragic update on the case, 3 years later after that rescue, more than half of the tigers have died. The rescued tigers were kept at 2 government-run wildlife sanctuaries, and 86 of 147 of them have died. Officials say the tigers were vulnerable to illness because of inbreeding. The DNA of all 147 confiscated tigers could be traced to 6 tigers who were the original breeding stock, and officials say such inbreeding affected their well-being, resulting in disabilities and weakened health condition.
มีสัตว์หลากหลายชนิดอยู่ในพื้นที่เดียวกัน
Those tigers were inbreeding with each other, which affected their health condition to be unhealthy.
นี้และแม้กระทั่งเสือที่อยู่ร่วมกันกับสัตว์ชนิดอื่นๆเนี่ย
The deaths of so many tigers in 2 government facilities has refocused attention on the challenges of managing an ever-expanding population of captive tigers. There are now 2,000 captive tigers in Thailand. Many are held by private individuals, not state institutions. Wildlife campaigners say state institutions in Thailand also need better funding to start taking custody of these privately owned tigers, and the tiger industry should be regulated more strictly.
There were many kinds of animals that used to live together in government institutions, which can be the cause of virus infection.
The temple's monks have blamed government authorities for not taking care of the tigers, and they have also denied accusations of animal abuse, trafficking, and illegal breeding while the tigers were under their care. Now the challenge is the survival of these tigers after years of inbreeding and captivity and subsequent relocation. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And here is a look at some more international news stories in Global Buzz. Children in Australia and the Pacific Islands kicked off a million-strong global climate strike on Friday. The children were heeding the rallying cry of teen activist Greta Thunberg, demanding adults to take action to stave off environmental disaster. From Sydney to Seoul to Sao Paulo, children shut their textbooks for one of the largest ever collective calls to action in a movement fueled by social media. More than 5,000 events took place worldwide, culminating in a massive rally in New York, where 1.1 million students in around 1,800 public schools were permitted to skip school. Trade negotiators from the US and China resumed face-to-face talks in Washington this week. The negotiations between the two sides are expected to lay the groundwork for top-level negotiations between US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He in October in Washington. An exact date for that meeting has not been released. The burst of diplomacy follows 2 weeks of a ratcheting up of the trade war after senior officials last met in Shanghai in late July. The Malaysian government on Thursday said it would carry out a cloud seeding whenever possible to clear the smoke from forest fires that has engulfed the country in the past few weeks. Malaysia closed more than 1,500 schools around the country as fires on Indonesia, Sumatra and Borneo Islands continued to burn. In recent 2 weeks, the Indonesian government has sent in thousands of military and police to douse the flames. Indonesia's neighbors have regularly complained about the smog caused by its forest blazes. Fires in the Amazon have been raging for weeks now. The US and Brazil this week pledged a $100 million biodiversity conservation fund for the forests. The fires have drawn attention to the alarming speed of deforestation in one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. Now, there are urgent warnings from scientists that a tipping point could be near, putting the rainforest at risk of gradually turning into a dry savanna. The Amazon tipping point could also lead to a cascade of other potential climate tipping points, resulting in a runaway global warming that humans would find it impossible to reverse. US and Brazil pledging more development for Amazon rainforest. $100 million biodiversity conservation fund, as recent world attention has focused on the growing number of fires in the area.
We're getting off the ground a $100 million 11-year impact investment fund for Amazon biodiversity conservation, and that project will be led by the private sector.
However, Brazil government denies that it was unable to cope with the environmental challenges of the Amazon, saying that there was rather an unfounded alarm over global climate change that was threatening Brazilian sovereignty.
Across the world, now we see some signs of ideas that would question sovereignty, that would be in a sense of, in the case of Brazil, that we specifically in the Amazon, that we maybe are not able to cope with the challenges of the environment there. We know that's not true.
Fire has long been a key tool for agricultural expansion in the Amazon, with farmers burning forests or logged land to clear it for crop production or cattle grazing. However, the number of fires in the Amazon this year is the highest since 2010, and deforestation rose for the 4th straight month in August from a year earlier. Critics blame President Jair Bolsonaro's policies that they say promote land clearing operations.
We are really worried because illegal loggers are taking all the riches from indigenous lands. We are really sad to see things being taken from our land and we can't do anything. So it's really complicated.
World reacted with outrage at the fires, protests breaking out in cities around the world. The G7 leaders held emergency talks during their summit in France, after which Bolsonaro said that protecting the rainforest is our duty, and he dispatched warplanes and army units to fight the blazes. However, nations say he's not doing enough. Finland says EU should stop import of beef and soya beans from Brazil over Amazon fire.
We should stop the import of beef and soya bean from Brazil. We want to increase pressure so that Brazilian government does something about the very destructive forest fires in the Amazon.
Last week, 7 Amazonian countries signed a pact to protect the world's largest tropical forests. However, scientists warn that decades of human activity and a changing climate has brought the jungle near a tipping point. They say if things continue as they are now, the Amazon might not exist at all within a few generations, with dire consequences for all life on Earth. They believe that the tipping point will be reached at 20 to 25% of deforestation, even if climate change is tamed. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And finally, what will you do if the toilet from your home is stolen? Well, I assume not much and would perhaps get another one. But not if it was made of real gold. An 18-carat gold toilet disappeared from Blenheim Palace in England, the birthplace of late Winston Churchill, on 14th of September, only 2 days after the palace installed it as part of an art exhibition. The solid gold toilet, named America, has been valued at around $5 million. 2 people have been arrested so far in connection with the theft, but the artwork has not been recovered. So take a look at this precious toilet before it was stolen. As I take your leave, I'll see you next week in another edition of World Panorama. Bye-bye.